Hello everybody, today we're going to create a new project. We're actually going to start our very first project. It's going to be our Hello World project, and if you're a developer who's just learning a new language, you'll be quite familiar with this concept of Hello World. However, if this is your first time learning, and this is going to be your primary language, or your first language, this is all new to you. Primarily what happens is we start all tutorials commonly with Hello World. It's your introduction tutorial essentially to development. Alright, and now I already have mine already made. Yours may not be made, or probably is not made essentially, so you're going to have to make a new project. Now, if you're using a different version of Visual Studio like Express or Professional, no worries. Ultimate just has a few little more bells and whistles. However, it should not affect us at all. So I'm going to go ahead and open my pre-existing tutorial, or my pre-existing project, I'm sorry, but you will be making a new project. So I'm going to go ahead and open this. I'm going to switch to my design view. I'm going to remove that. And your form should look something like this once you create your new project. I've named mine YouTube Tut Hello World. You can name yours whatever you want. So I'm going to go ahead and go over some of the basics of the tutorial, or I'm sorry, of Visual Studio. Visual Studio, as you can see, I have my code view and my designer view. To get into your code view, you simply double click on the form, or on the back part of the form, and yours will probably look like this. Now we're not going to go over by-val or any of that stuff yet, or system arguments, but what you'll see here is your load argument, and it's talking about my base. My base is this form, and it's talking about load, the load event when this application loads. Alright, so just ignore that though for the moment. Don't worry about it. We'll come back to it later. So another way you can get in there though is to right click over here and click View Code. Pretty basic stuff. However, fairly useful, I would say, to know, because sometimes you can't always get into your designer and vice versa. You can also do it from here. You can right click View Designer. The cool thing about working with Microsoft tools is that they give you a lot of options and a lot of ways to get into menus. If you're an Apple user or an iOS user, I'm sorry, you're probably not familiar with the idea of right click. Fortunately for you, Microsoft Windows has a lot of useful features with the right click button. If you don't have a right click button on your mouse, I recommend that you go out and buy a PC based mouse so you can have the right click option, because it makes life a lot easier. Alright, so moving forward, I'm going to go strictly into the designer and strictly work with that. The next thing I'm going to work with is the toolbox itself. Your toolbox should be very similar to mine. I've added a few extra tools to mine, simply because I do a large variety of type of development. If you don't see your toolbox over here somewhere, you can get it from View, and it's right here as well, or you can do the hotkey combination Control-Alt-X to bring up your toolbox. And I recommend that you put it over here. The other things that I have here is Server Explorer. This is not something that you'll be using. This is like if you're using Team Foundation, you're working for a large corporation or something, where you're checking projects in and out, using source control. Don't worry about that, and definitely don't worry about data source or data sources either, because you're probably not going to be working with SQL for a long time, and this is essentially where you would start working with your SQL. Now, what you should see though is Solution Explorer. Solution Explorer is critical. You want to see Solution Explorer. Team Explorer is what I was talking about over here, which is, Server Explorer essentially. Team Explorer is essentially the same as Solution Explorer. It just, if you're using like a Microsoft Team Foundation or something, you're going to use this. So don't worry about it. It's not relevant. And then here's just class view. Again, something I wouldn't worry about. I've very irregularly do I ever use any of those views. So moving forward, what we want to do here though is we want to come back over here and we want to just mouse over the label, and we're just going to drag it onto our form. And you can just place it anywhere. I'm going to place mine right here. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and edit this label. Now, the very first thing, let me back up here for a second for the Apple users. What I did is I simply right clicked and I went into the object's properties. This label is our object. This is what we're going to modify, is this object. Start thinking of things as objects, because that's what they are. Alright, so I just double click to highlight my text, and I'm going to change it to say hello world. Okay? I'm going to click off of that and click on where it says tag, and voila, my text changes. You can change the alignment, you can do a lot of things. You can set its visibility to false. There's a lot of things you can do in the properties. We'll review these things later, and you can review them on your own as well freely and just kind of play around with it. The next thing though that I want to do is I want to change my font, and as you can see, if I click this little drop down right here, I have more options. However, I don't need to mess with that part. I'm just going to go ahead and click right here, because now I get this lovely nifty little menu. Now, every computer that I'm aware of has Times New Roman. Even Linux machines and Apple machines, I'm pretty sure, have Times New Roman font. So I'm going to switch my font to that, and I'm going to set its size to 20, and I'm going to make it bold. So now it says hello world. You can also change the fore color or the font color to any color you want, essentially. I'm not going to mess with that though. I'm going to scroll up here to back color. The back color is the color that's behind the object. As you can see, the object is highlighted. Inside that little box is the back color. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to go ahead and set it to blue. Now you can see what I'm talking about. See how it's different than the actual form's back color? So I don't want that. I want mine to be transparent. So whatever this back color of the form is what the color of this will be. The next thing, and the last thing essentially I'm going to go over with this object, is essentially how to name the object. Not the name that you see right here, but this is the actual object's name itself. When you call to this object, this is the name that you're going to make calls to. Alright, and we're going to go over that here in just a second. But the main thing I wanted to go over first is when you do a label, the proper way to do a label is LVL, and then whatever you want to call your label. I'm going to call mine hello world. Alright, now this is a very common practice that you'll see with software development. Instead of saying integer, we say int, and things like that. You'll pick up these things, like instead of saying string, we say str. You'll pick these things up though as we go. Just make sure that you're using proper labels, because it absolutely drives me nuts when developers who are at senior levels do not use proper naming procedures. Alright, so now that we have our label set up, we want it to do something. You can double click to get into the load event. You can come over here to your Solution Explorer and right click and go into view code, or however you want to do it. Just come on in here to your load event. Now, when I say load event, I mean the event that occurs when we load this application. This is the events that's going to happen within this form, or this section, I'm sorry, this subsection. This is what we want it to do when we start our application. Alright, so what I want to do is I want to center the words hello world in my form. Now, I also want to adjust the form though itself. So let's come back to the designer real quick. Let's right click and go to its properties real quick. And let's change form 1 to FRM, or let's say YouTube tut Hello world. Now we're going to change the name up there essentially. Now, because we're good programmers, we're going to change the name of this form as well to FRM Hello World. Alright. Now my form is starting to look a little bit more like a professional's form. Next thing, let's change the size. Let's say it's 500 by 500. Okay? Everybody probably has that screen resolution. Now, let's do one more thing. Let's set the maximum size to 500 by 500 as well. So the form cannot go any larger than 500. And then let's set the minimum size to 200 by 200. So it cannot go any smaller than 200 by 200. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about here in just a minute. Alright, now we have that set. Let's go ahead and save our document by clicking Save All. Or you can click on File, Save All. Now, the reason why I use Save All, because if you just simply click on Save Form, it's only going to save this form. As you develop, you'll have multiple forms, and it'll only save that form that that you had it saved. And lots of times you'll forget that you had worked on multiple forms, so it's just a good idea to get into just the habit of just saving all. Alright, next thing, let's go ahead and start debugging, or click on the play button essentially. So click on play, and voila. Pretty plain, doesn't do anything, whatever. It's just kind of hanging out there. So let's look at our minimize and maximize. So this is maximized. This is the biggest my screen's going to get, and then let's go ahead and minimize it. Or let's try to shrink it down. Now that's 200 by 200. It won't go any smaller. Let's maximize it. That's 500 by 500. What I've done is I've set the property of the minimum and the max that you can shrink this. Alright? Now, let's play with that a little bit. Let's build onto that. Let's go into our form load event. And let's set the position of this label. So let's go LBL, Hello World, and as you can see, IntelliSense will pop it right up. We want to give it a new location, so we say location equals new point. Now, before we go any further, look at what it says right here. Structure point represents an ordered pair of integer x and y coordinates. Now, what does that mean? Well, I'm going to go ahead and, so I don't get any bad commenting here or errors. I'll go ahead and set this to 0 and 0 for a second. Alright, so what this means though, real quickly, is we need an x value and a y value. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with what x and y means, x is left and right. And the y value, or the y-axis, is up and down, or its height. And we commonly think of the x value as its width. Now let me actually show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to remove all this. Let's say we want me.client rectangle dot width, because we're going to do the x value first, divided by 2 minus I'm going to go over this real quickly and then I'll go right back over it, I promise. I'll explain this math problem real quickly while I'm typing this. If you are terrified of math, you probably need to never ever consider being a developer. Developing software is all about math, logical math, taking math or using math essentially to solve problems. If you don't like that concept, development is most definitely not for you. It also deals a lot with statistics. Alright, now I'm going to explain this math problem real quick, and then we'll show you what it does. Alright, so order of operations says you do what's in parentheses first, right? Okay, from left to right. Now, think of these as two separate math problems, because essentially they are. We have the me.client rectangle.width. Now, what this means is me is referring to this form itself. The client rectangle is all this gray space right here. That's the client rectangle. Okay? And we're saying it's width, right? That's what we said, width. So, the width divided by 2, or divided in half. So that gives us one part of our math problem. The other part is the labels width divided by 2. So whatever this width is divided by 2. In fact, let's take a look at that value. So let's look here. Where is the size? Here's the size. Okay. So 160 divided by 2. And then whatever this is, which is 500 divided by 2, is going to be the x value. Same thing applies for the y value. Now, what this essentially is going to do is going to center hello world on load. Now, it's only going to do it once, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. See, now it's perfectly centered, right, in the form. What happens when I maximize? Let's say I want to increase the size. Look there. Oh, it's no longer centered. See what I'm saying? It only does it during the load event, because that's the only time that we told it to center. So what if we want to recenter this? How do we do that? Well, let's drag this down real quick. And I'm going to create just a really simple button. And because we're good little programmers as well, we're going to properly label our buttons. So I'm going to do this real quick, and I promise you I will go back over it. Alright, now I'm going to show you, so we already know what the label is. The button is no different. How you do your formatting on that is no different than how you would essentially do your label for the most part. However, on buttons, I don't like text. Most of the time, I don't put text on my buttons because the text should go above, so it's easier to read. And that's just from a entertainment software developer's perspective. Other people may will tell you that that's wrong. Well, I would tell you that they are wrong. And I know this because I've talked to several other GUI design artists who disagree with that and always say that you should have your label above or your text above because it's easier for your user to read than it is on the label itself. So that's just from a GUI artist's perspective, or at least every GUI artist I've spoke to. Alright, so now we know that we want the same function essentially on load for our button. So how do we get there? Well, I'm just simply going to double click on my button. And what it's going to do is it's just going to load this for me. Right? See how it did that? I just double clicked and automatically filled in all the gaps for me. Now, I'm a lazy developer, so I'm just going to copy and paste. And voila. Now, let's see if this works. Now, why did it do that? Let's try widen this out. See what happens. Now, why is it doing this? That's a question that every developer should probably be asking themselves. Why is it doing this weird thing? Interesting, huh? It's because we're telling it to reposition itself based on those values. So now that the height has changed, the only thing that's going to change here is that height location. It's going to try to center itself. Now, that doesn't look exactly 100% perfectly centered, does it? Of course not. But it's centered according to our variable statement. Let's say that we want to try to go, let's remove this. Will this work? Of course it will. We just shortened the math problem. Let's see if it works. Let's see how well it works. It's not going to be as centered as we'd asked it to originally, but it'll be pretty close enough to where you probably won't be able to tell a difference. In fact, because we've done that, we're not going to need these parentheses anymore. There's no need for that. So we can get rid of that. We can shorten up our math problem, simplify it even further. We do have to have that one though. And we've made a mistake here somewhere. Oh, I see. There we go. Now we're good. Now let's debug this and see what happens. A little strange, huh? But it's still working essentially the same, right? Alright, and that is essentially a part of development, is tweaking it to fit your needs. This program may not work perfectly right now, or a way that you would want it, or you would think that it would work, but nevertheless, it still works. It does exactly what we told it to do. And that's the whole point of software development. It does exactly what we tell it to do and nothing more. So I hope you guys have learned a little bit from this tutorial. I hope this has helped you out a little bit. In fact, real quickly, before we end this tutorial, I want to go over and explain this statement one more time so we understand what we're doing here, to make sure we understand positioning. Because this is a really important part of development, is positioning. Alright, so we started out with our object. We told that we want to make a call to this object, right? And that's our hello world object, or our hello world label. And that's our object, and we want to change its location to equal a new point. And that new point will be, the x value will be, in fact, let's go ahead and let's comment this. So we'll say our label object position equals x equals form width divided by 2, y equals form height divided by 2. Then we can actually just copy and paste that comment down here as well. So now, if we read our math problem, we know exactly what we're doing here. So when we come back later on, we know exactly what we're doing. We're simply just trying to center the text. Now, let's say that we didn't want to center the text. You can simply remove all this and just put regular values, like 1, 2, 5, 10, 100, whatever you wanted to, and it would go right at that point. This is just a little bit more of a more complex way, I guess, to do it, and I figured I would show you guys the harder way, essentially, with positioning than I would the simpler way. Even though these are basic tutorials, I think it's a good idea to go ahead and dive right into the math of development, so you really, prepare yourself for the complexities that you're about to handle. Alright, so please post your comments. Please post any suggestions you have about this tutorial, whether you liked it or you didn't like it, if it was confusing, and just really, just let me know what you think. Alright, so thank you.